attention back up to the front. I know you may have some more discussion that you want to have. But just a couple of things you may want to pay attention to as you go through the questions and as you set your goals. Again, questions 3 through 8. Number 4, our leadership represents the diversity of the population we hope to serve. You can say 69% disagree in the group as a whole. So how do you get there? If that's important, I ask you a question that may not be important to you, but those are the things that you want to think about. I do think power and who's leading is important. So how do you get those goals? What do you have to do differently? You have to figure out what cost you're willing to pay in regards to this. I was talking to Clyde. I live in Texas. That's where I lead the church from. I have a staff person on the West Coast. I have 2 staff people on the West Coast. I have people in Elkhart. I have people in Newton. Because I thought it was important for our staff to represent the diversity of the church. If everyone just lived in one area, how would I know what's going on in the rest of the church or how our policies impact the broader church? I think it's good for the national staff to be national. As we do this work, it gives us different perspectives. So those are things you have to think about. How important is that in your conference? Let's see, clearly define goals. Question number 5, that's something you have to set out to talk a little bit more about that. Number 7, question number 7, every conference has a standardized and effective process to deal with discrimination complaints. That would actually kind of happen. I'm a little bothered when people say nuisance. I mean, you don't know. So even if you have policies and procedures, you need to make sure they're advertised and promoted so people know. Creating that knowledge, creating the energy is an essential part of creating a culture. You have to really clearly define what the win is for people. You have to motivate people to do this work. Everyone wants to be motivated to do it. Question number 8, the institution has adequate training to help us accomplish our diversity, equity, and inclusion goals. 60% said they disagree, so that shows you, 67% disagree. So that shows you have a gap there, that you need the training to back this up. You can't just be this meeting with me. You can't just be the idea. How are you going to develop the skills that you need to keep this work going and keep it at the forefront? Again, one of the things I'll remind you of is people will engage this work in their primary orientation. So again, be mindful of people in polarization. You may have to bring them along in different ways. The people that are in adaptation and acceptance, you all may have to slow down a little bit. Remember, everyone is not where you are, so just be mindful of that. So what are the next steps on your journey? So this is especially for the tax group, things that I recommend that you do. Again, I have a couple resources here that you may want to utilize as part of your training tools. I also gave you a link to my personal website. There are blogs and some resources on there that you can check out if you're interested. Of course, we have Roots of Justice. That's another group that we work with closely in the denomination. And the Mennonite Church USA website has a list of other qualified administrators for the IDI. I don't do this training really a lot anymore in the church. I'm just doing it because it's a junior conference. So there are other trainers out there that are just as qualified to do this. They may do it a little bit different way. I speak to a lot of people outside the church, so I've shifted my training a little bit because I know working with corporations and other nonprofit organizations, there really are a lot more results focused. And I think we in the church, and in the church, we have some results orientation as we think about this. So next steps, set specific cultural competency goals. Don't try to do everything. Try to do 1 or 2 or 3 things very well. Set those out, write them down. Be really clear about what you hope to accomplish. Because this can be scary for people that have polarization and denial. This work can be scary. Our news media, even some of the narratives of the church, is really just setting up these black and white, and I mean literally black and white narratives, but also just polarization around politics. So set some very specific goals of what you hope to accomplish, and stick with that narrative. Don't let people read other things into what you're trying to do, other than what you said you were going to do. So be clear about what you want to accomplish and accomplish. Develop a regular training schedule to address gaps. I have wonderful meeting with people at Eastern Mennonite Seminary yesterday about training, how do we develop our pastors in Mennonite Church USA. But one of the things we want to do is really just set a really clear pathway for that to happen. We have a lot of programs, a lot of things that are going on, but we really need a good roadmap for people in this denomination to see, hey, these are opportunities out there, these are skills that we want you to have, and this is how you get that training. You need to do the same thing with your diversity and inclusion training. It can't just be a one-off. What are the resources and tools you're going to use to create the culture that you want to create? Be mindful of your own bias. So we all have bias, we all have stories. Again, bias is a bad name, but it helps us in some situations. It preserves us. It allows us to see the world in certain ways, but it can turn into unhealthy practices. It can turn into racism, sexism, and all those other things if we aren't mindful of our bias and how it impacts us, how it shapes how we see the world, how it shapes what we put on our wrists, all those type of things is a part of our bias. What assumptions are you making about leadership and worship? It's really important in the church. Again, I think as we monitor our polarities in the church, I think this is a really good question for us to wrestle with. Our leadership styles, our worship styles, our theology, how does that relate to this work? There are some very good and important things about being Anabaptist and Mennonite Christians that we want to preserve. I do sometimes feel that maybe we'll switch forward to just like mainstream evangelical. I don't know what that's about, but we want to preserve those traditions. But what aspects of those traditions are our theology? What aspects of those things are just our preference? We need to distinguish between the two. When I do worship at convention, I'll often get some critique from some people. It's always like, no matter how many hymns we sing, we don't sing enough hymns. I don't know what it is on that. We had a hymn sing, and we sang hymns every morning at convention. People were like, we didn't sing the hymns. Like, we sang the whole half of the worship service was hymns. But I guess it's just, we just sing all hymns, so we didn't sing that hymns. But we need to just think about what are things of tradition, what are things that are really important to our theology. And let people know, hey, we're not moving away from our theology, but sometimes we have different preferences in these things. Understand intersectionality. We're not just one thing, we're many things. So we are diverse in ourselves, we have diversity in our churches. We fall in a number of different categories, and the work that we do with racial justice and healing will bleed over into other areas. All right, so now, opportunity for you to ask any questions if you have any. And I don't know if I don't know if you have questions that they can. Any questions? No questions, but y'all are ready to go with it. Ready to go home.
You did a bio of the Mennonite conference. I wonder if you've done one for MCUSA. I don't imagine you've gotten enough representative people across the whole spectrum to help us out, or have you?
Yeah, I've done this with different groups. So with our staff, and so it's always been in different groups. I've done it at a number of the colleges, and so we are a diverse church. We have some people that are, even in denial in some of the places. Not the majority of people, but we do have those pockets. Again, most people will be in realization. That's where a lot of us start this journey. And so, we have a diverse church. That's part of the challenge of leadership. Is how do we relate to all these people? Again, I've spent time with people in San Francisco and people in Lancaster. And I said, hey, the folks in Lancaster went set in some of these churches in San Francisco, their head would explode. Because my head almost exploded. I'm like, wow. But I do have appreciation that the people want to be a part of the Mennonite Church. They really value that connection. They value different aspects of the theology, but the needs are totally different. The needs and the challenges that we face in these various communities is different. So how you do things around here, your cultural paradigms and understandings may not be helpful in another context. So that's why we want to be mindful of these things as we mentioned.
I've been reading multiple places that there is no such thing as race. It's made up. It's an artificiality. And we're all the same, and we invented that term by one group to control another group. And so the question is this may be too abstract for what we're doing here, but if we have an anti-racism task force, it suggests that there is racism, that there is race. And so are we out to simply accept the fact that for many people there are differences based on what is called race, or are we out to eliminate that whole concept and idea that there are differences that we would so categorize?
Yeah, that's actually an excellent question. And I do, when I teach this to different groups, I said race has two components. There's a social construct, which I think is used to control and divide people. Again, we fit people in just a handful of categories that doesn't fully express the diversity of the group. You know, once you come over here, if you have skin like mine, you are, you're black, even if you're Jamaican or Nigerian. And those cultures are different. I have some friends that are Nigerian. It's like different, right? They have different cultural expectations and norms. And so it's a thing of convenience for us to simplify the world. Resources are divided along those lines. You know, it's political, it's in the census. We have to have these categories, but it ignores many things about who we are. But there's also a sense of belonging that's built into some of these cultural understandings. I enjoy being a part of the black race, black culture. The things that come along with that, it allows me to say, hey, you may have a similar sense of humor. You may like similar food. You have similar experiences. One of the ways that's being articulated now in this work is a sense of belonging. It creates a sense of belonging. And so do we need to pay attention to race? I think we do in this country. I think it's a reality that's been created as arbitrary as it is, but we want to have a healthy understanding about that. That's why I say we aren't just one thing. And my daughter and I, because my daughter, she's younger, because she knows what's going on in the world. She knows everything. We have a discussion about black, who can be black. I said, how can you tell somebody else what it means to be black? I said, you have relatives that look, as white as any white person in the world. And so it is some arbitrariness. I have plenty of relatives on the Guyton side, because in Mississippi, there were the white Guytons and the black Guytons, and the white Guytons, old man Joe Guyton, he's the person that owned our family, very clear who, kind of the family time directly tied to the white Guytons, and so that was an evident part of that community, but some of them didn't look white, but they were categorized as black. I had a black relative that killed this is not the brag about him, said he killed a white person, but he looked white himself. That's probably one of the only reasons that he got away with it. He went to jail for a little while, he didn't get lynched or anything like this. This is back in rural South, rural Mississippi. So we have to pay attention to the reality of race in our society. We want to get rid of racism, that systemic misuse of power. That's what we're talking about. We're not saying we need to just focus on race, but we need to get rid of racism, which is the systemic misuse of power as it relates to how race is defined in our country. So that's why it's good for you to have those definitions so you know what you're working at. Does that mean that we just limit everybody, pigeonhole everyone based on their race? No, don't do that. Appreciate people for who they are.
I have a cousin who's black, and he asked me a question I didn't have an answer for. He said, is this project that you're working on racism for whites congregations, he pastors a black church, or is this something that is going to be used in congregations of color? Because it's been his experience as a black person that there are blacks who do not like whites. And I used to be one of them, he said. And he said, is this going to be all-inclusive or just for white people? So I'd like a response to that. know how to deal with that question.
Well, it should be for Virginia Conference. So if you were part of this conference and working at these things, that's who it should be. Earlier I spoke to differentiated education. We have different needs based on where we are in the journey. And one of the things that we focus on when we say racism, which again, you have to be really clear about this. We all have prejudice, right? We all have bias. And so what you are attacking as a predominantly white institution is the systemic issues of power as it comes to race. That journey is different would be different for an unempowered, prejudiced black person. You know what I'm saying? There's different needs. That's why you have to focus on your goals, what you're trying to change, what you're hoping to improve upon. Now, one of your objectives, I think you talk about relationships. That's something that really needs to be articulated across everyone. We need to have good, healthy relationships. We're able to function and do ministry together. But when you think about anti-racism, there's a power dynamic that can't be ignored. And so that's why you have to have a really good analysis of what you're working at. You're not just trying to make people like each other. That's not what this is about. It's about systems. It's about historical uses. It's about those stories where one group is disenfranchised or isn't able to contribute. And so that's kind of the answer that I would, work with your, when you see your cousin, with your cousin. Yeah, these things are complex. People want to just give these binary answers. It's not about this. It's not a binary solution. Again, you saw that chart where I talk about systemic racism, which starts with how we view and see the world, and then policies and procedures. So a good part of this is dealing with those policies and procedures of the system, regardless of your racial identity or racial background. But the tendency is that those things do manifest itself with one group being in power, one group being out of power, or something backwards. But we have to work at it. We have to work at it together. But that answer is very total. I mean, that question, I'm not saying that question is a very polarized question. It still says that us versus them dynamic. And that's one thing that we want to move out of.
Who is tasked with these next steps?
Well, I'm assuming that it's the staff and it's the racial healing task group it will be on them to look at that. Now, you all are aware of it. I think once you are aware of something, you're accountable for some of the work that needs to be done in your role as leaders. But if you have a task group and you have your conference ministers, they will really be key in making sure these things happen and making sure those tasks are followed in a way that's beneficial. But this is one of the things I say about like anti-racism and changing culture. This really has to be top down. I know we try to act like we don't have power and structures and all that stuff in the church, but this has to be top down. It's not going to work when it comes up to the grassroots because the people at the top still have the power and you can squash these efforts. You can set the agenda. You can decide where resources are allocated. So this has to be top down. So that's where it needs to start.
Glenn, looking at kind of the continuum here of intercultural development, have you ever tested and found that their mode of operation is on the upper end, like the acceptance or the adaptation? And where my question is going is, how would we look differently if we're there?
Most groups say minimalization. That's most groups say minimalization. That's normally the best that you can get in a lot of institutions because you're just trying to create this one culture and folks are not trying to make waves. That's kind of mainly how we function. I have seen groups that are further along, but then some of those groups are normally labeled as progressive. And they get resistance. That's why I tell you those people that are at that upper echelon, maybe that's not the right word, but that towards the right end of the spectrum, you have to realize that you have to go at a sustainable pace. You have to pay attention to that. It takes a lot to change these institutions. But once you become more diverse, you have that diversity of thought, you're reaching your goals, your organization can be transformed, but you will continue to have to bring people along, how you onboard people, how you evaluate your systems. It's a long-term process. And so some organizations do it well where they're moving more toward that upper echelon. It's very rare. Institutions are really designed to stay in minimization. But you do want to avoid having a lot of people in denial and polarization. Yeah, it takes work. Mainly you'll have a larger number of people in leadership that are towards that adaptation, acceptance place. So it depends on who you are. That's the other thing. It depends on who you're evaluating, and it tends to be in organizations that are doing it well. The leaders tend to be toward that right end, but the workers and other lower level managers still tend to be toward that minimization. So it'll still depend on how you break up those groups. So I've done some of the colleges, and like the leadership team, vice presidents, they were all kind of toward the right, and then you got to like certain staff, they were like way in polarization, and some in denial. And that was usually based kind of on education, experience, life experience.
Glenn, a little off subject, but are you preaching somewhere tomorrow?
Nope, I'm going home. Yeah.
Just curious as to whether or not you have some concrete tools right away to offer as we live into the reality of the spectrum of difference, even within this group, between acceptance and adaptation and polarization. As we move together, what are the tools that we can incorporate in our relating with one another and moving us along? Instead of getting what we're tended to do in our culture right now is to get into heated arguments. And you can't believe why they can't think like I do, and that kind of thing. We don't want to go there. And so what are some concrete things that we can be doing now in this group?
Well, I think this is a start. Figuring out where you are, your baseline. Again, I recommend there's some questions here that I think you should go through. I do have another download I can send you all with the framework. But you have to set some of the goals for yourself. And it's really just clearly defining what you want to do. I can give you definitions and things like that that will help you, but it's really important that you work through those things for yourself. I can't tell you what culture you want to have, but I can tell you where you can get that information. The training that we've made available. The denomination has made some resources available that you all can tap into. And for people that are in different places in the journey. But your biggest job is really just clearly define this for Virginia Conference, and then saying, hey, these are the things that are available, promoting this throughout your system, making it a priority. That's something that I can't do for you that really again has to come top down. You got to put in effort and figure out what's the cost you're willing to pay. I work with some organizations where they have it really clearly defined. Hey, this is what we want to do. These are our leadership competencies that we expect. This is the training that everyone's going to go to. And so we have training and things like that available, but it's up to you all to say, okay, these are the trainings that we want. We're going to make it possible for everyone to go to in some form of fashion or it's a requirement for leadership.
Glenn, thank you. This has been a wonderful experience for me, at least, just new coming into this organization. I'm very, very grateful for what you have shared with us. A thought occurred to me, sort of wanting to envision what might a group experience if we improved and became more affirming, no, became more adaptive. What are the characteristics? I mean, why do we want to do this work? You held out a vision for diversity and equity and inclusion, but, you know, those are sort of abstract concepts, very helpful, but what might it look like? How would we experience ourselves differently if we were further along in this spectrum? What might we lean into and hope for?
Yeah, I mean, if I could be arrogant for a minute, I would say just like me. I think that, you know, I've really been blessed to be a part of this church. I've learned so much. There are things that have changed about me. My life is better because of the diversity that I've experienced about being part of this church. I've learned new ways of worship. I've learned new ways of organizing. I've learned other cultural practices that have made my life better. I've met people that I never have met before. I'm smarter because I've been challenged by this church. I would have never, I know it kind of sounds like I'm trying to brag about it, but it's not, because it is a lot of work. But I've done those things because I've been around people, urban, I was around urban, I don't know how many books urban wrote. I would have never written a book if I hadn't been, had urban as my boss, and met people like you when you were at AMBS. So those things have challenged me. And I think I've brought some things to the denomination, to different ways of thinking about things, different leadership. I have other connections outside the Mennonite Church that I've brought into the Mennonite Church to increase our capacity. I think if people knew about this theology and weren't isolated because of some of the cultural understandings, this church could grow and thrive in new ways. And it has. I think some of the early efforts that we had when we were more intentional about church growth and when the people at Wharf River down in Newport News went down to the Bibles, as they call it, to have Bible study and engage people for vacation Bible school and other things. You grew up a whole church, Calvary Community Church, out of that because of practicing some form of diversity and inclusion. And so it's a whole world out there that needs to hear what we have to hear, but if we're just isolated in our cultural bubble, where people have a negative viewpoint of what, you're Mennonite, you're what? I'm Mennonite. That's the question I get. We have so much to share, but there's still so many barriers that keep us from being as effective as we could be. I think our church is great. I tell people I'm more Mennonite than I thought I was going to ever be. I surprise myself sometimes. I'm really Mennonite now. That's about to shake my head. I was like, man, I can't believe I'm thinking like this. But it's because of what I was exposed to. And so if we draw other people in, again, we want to keep our Anabaptist theology. We want to value the Anabaptist heritage. But there are so many ways that we can grow and improve. Even when I was talking at EMS yesterday, I was saying, hey, look, these are some things that we can do. We need to think about different models of educating our people. I hang out with corporate leaders, so we need to think about this funnel approach. There's a long distance between an MD and an online course. That's a big gap there. And somebody's going to fill that gap. Why can't our institutions use some of their expertise to start bringing people in? Let's use some of those principles, funnel people in. Let's do online courses. Let's find ways of connecting people and create a pipeline for our pastors and young leaders. That takes creative, innovative thought. If we're just locked into our own systems and way of doing things, we won't realize the potential that's out there. We're going to miss out on other opportunities.
Glenn, I too want to thank you for coming here to Harrisburg and being with us on Saturday morning. It's been really good with me. Appreciate it. I want to give a testimony to Ryan Albrum's article that is in the current issue of Anabaptist World. And if you haven't seen that either online or in print, I really want to recommend Ryan is a pastor of First Mennonite down in Richmond. He has an outstanding, I think, theological article. And as I listened to Sarah's question a moment ago, Ryan gives a theological rationale for the why why we should care about inclusion of all people in the kingdom.
Yeah.
It's an excellent theological, and to me it was just a brilliant article. Find that article from one of our own pastors. He gives the rationale for the theological basis for inclusion, racial inclusion, gender inclusion, he mentions. But I found a thread in there, and this is my question for you, Glenn. I found a thread in Lyon's article that suggests that in the kingdom, in our church, we also need to think about political inclusion of people that are different than we are. And I'll tell you, folks, I circulated in rural regions of Lycoming County and beyond, and I have plenty of good folks in the Mennonite Church in our conference who think politically, think very conservative. Okay? And I'm hoping that we can find a place for them. And this was part of Ryan's article. Can we find a place for all of our members in this church? And that's sort of my question, observation. I hope that in this kingdom Mennonite Church, we can find a place for these folks who aren't sitting here this morning, but they're out in the business world, in the more rural world that I also circulated. And that's just sort of a hope and a general observation. But find that article from Ryan. It's a really good article, I think.
You know, I think one of the things that we have to be careful of is not about falling, again, I think I've said this before, don't fall into this trap of buying everything. You know, there's some things I'm conservative on, there's some things I'm progressive about. Depends on what the issue is. And I got enough labels to put on me. I don't need to label on. I mean, you can label yourself as a Republican, Democrat if you want to. I'm going to vote for whoever I think is the best candidate. I think they all are corrupt, if you just ask me personally. But, you know, we fall into these binary traps, binary thinking, and then it prevents us from really going into this intercultural mindset. That, again, we're not trying to create these parallel cultures. I don't think that's going to be helpful because then we just kind of stay in our lane and we kind of look over what they're doing, we're looking over what they're doing, but we never merge and can fully take advantage of all the gifts and skills. There's some things I like. I think Trump did some good stuff. I don't like Trump as a person. Did he have some good policies? Yeah, Trump has some good policies. Do I like Biden? I think Biden messed up a whole bunch of stuff, especially recently. But you know, I would have voted for him over Trump in that situation because what's going on. And so I'm trying to live my life in a way, and I hope that we all can start thinking about this, that there are different intersections. We aren't just one thing. And why do we need to add another level of separation to our identity? If you're conservative, I'm sure there's some things that you are progressive about, some things that you want to move and be different about. So we limit ourselves when we just box ourselves in, and we create that polarization, us versus them. That's what we want to avoid. How can we be we? How can we be we, understanding that there is a diversity? There are some conservative things that are really important that we need in the church. There are some progressive things that we really need that are important in the church. There are some rich things about our history as a Baptist, even some cultural things. Again, like somebody taught me about potato water. You know, that's I don't know if it's just a midnight thing, but I learned about potato water. I was like, I just don't know what I always get up with potato water. But I've learned those things because I'm not limiting myself to one way of thinking other than the things that are critical to who we are as Baptists. That's the message that we need to get across. Yes, conservatives can be welcome. Conservative values, progressive values can be welcome. You know, as long as those things align with who we are and the goals that we have as our institutions. The church really, we need to do a better job of getting out of this binary thinking and just limiting ourselves to how other people want to describe us, especially the news media and social media. I think it's going to do ourselves a disservice if we let that be the narrative. We need to figure out how can we understanding that there are other complex parts of our personality, our identity that we can also so value. I'll tell you a story. So I had one of the people that I was working with, an institution, we were using an example of, I think it was Aunt Jemima and Uncle Ben. And, you know, some people had a problem with that anyway. And it was monkeys. It was monkeys. A woman referred to some black kids as monkeys. I mean, she wasn't trying to be negative. She was just saying, oh, they like little monkeys. because that was a term of endearment where she came. But for many African-American people, that can be offensive, right? Because of the historical connotation, how black people were portrayed. So I had a woman that was from Jamaica. She said, hey, I never heard that before. Should I be offended? I said, no, you don't have to be offended. You don't have to be offended by anything. That's not your experience as a black Jamaican. You're not African-American, so you don't have that same cultural history or that same cultural baggage. So if you're fine with a white person calling your kid a little monkey, that's fine. You just have to be aware that as a black African-American in the United States, that's offensive. So I would use that term around that group of people. So you can be aware of that, and you can be culturally sensitive to it. It doesn't mean you have to be offended or it has to be problematic or you have to go do some things differently with your personal life in order to value those differences and understand how things affect different groups. And that's the place that we need to come to. We're not trying to get this monocultural mindset. No, we want to be able to shift perspectives and see things from different ways. I thought that's kind of like what our third way was, right? We're supposed to have alternatives as Anabaptists.
Well, I think you gave the answer to the question that's been asked just by being who you are. You could still be in the military. You could be head of Afghanistan. You could do a lot of things, and you chose instead to go to the Mennonite Church. And here you are. So we can focus on all the language and things, but at your core, you chose what's deepest in our theology, which is to be people of peace. And then when Sarah asked, Paul asked what that would look like, I think it would be when we're people of peace.
Yeah. And part of it too is a mutual thing. It's not just like, I feel like the church chose me too, and welcomed me, a number of people, some folks that aren't here anymore, but welcomed me and befriended me and helped me to understand about this culture and were willing to take some risks with me. That's what it's all about. That's been my experience in this denomination. And also, as you think about C3, which is very unique to Virginia Conference, I always felt like the C3 was a part of this conference and a part of this denomination, but also able to be authentic in who they were, in how they led, and how they worshiped, but they were still welcome for the most part as part of this church. And so you have a really good paradigm here to build upon. So how do you make space for people, different leadership styles, but also